Over the past 2 decades, the virtual world has witnessed a tremendous increase in the number of narratives about encounters with ghostly children. Who are these nocturnal visitors, and what do they seek from the people they unexpectedly encounter? In this episode, we explore the phenomenon of the black-eyed children. Snow had been falling steadily for several days, covering a sleepy corner of Vermont where an elderly couple resided. The moon illuminated the clear black sky, pouring its borrowed light onto the fields below, amplified by its reflection on the pure white snow. The scene suggested the approach of dawn, but the reality was different. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the husband suddenly woke up to the sound of persistent knocking coming from the ground floor at the entrance of his house. He got up and went to the window to check the source of the knocking at this unusual hour. There was no car parked outside, nor any footprints on the pristine snow along the path leading to his front door. He shrugged and slowly descended to the ground floor, while his wife rose from the bed behind him. Upon reaching the hallway, he opened the front door to find 2 children, a boy and a girl, standing on the front porch, seemingly unaffected by the bitter cold. Both were wearing old-fashioned clothes and traditional hairstyles, and neither seemed to want to look at him directly. The boy spoke slowly and deliberately, saying that their parents were on their way to pick them up, and asked if they could come in to shelter from the severe cold. Their story was vague, but despite the old man's doubts, his wife quickly ushered the children into the front living room. The 2 settled on the couch and suddenly became unresponsive, unable to answer any of the couple's questions. There was something extremely disturbing about these children that the old man couldn't identify for a while, until he noticed that their eyes were completely black, without any visible pupil or iris. In a moment he was overwhelmed by a terrible feeling of dizziness and disturbance. As he fell back into an armchair, his wife gasped at the sight of blood flowing from his nose. She rushed to the kitchen to fetch a towel, and while she was trying to stop the bleeding, suddenly all the lights in the house went out. Then a melodious voice pierced the darkness, as the little girl announced that their parents had arrived. The 2 small figures rose from the couch and headed towards the front door and out of the building. There was a black, classic American car waiting for them outside with 2 men in dark suits standing beside it. They all left together. The couple remained huddled in the dark, terrified by what had just happened, until the lights mysteriously returned after about half an hour. But the wider effects of this evil visit took longer to become apparent. Both husband and wife continued to suffer from bouts of dizziness and nosebleeds in the months following the incident. Furthermore, the old man was later diagnosed with skin cancer, and of the 4 cats owned by the couple, 1 was found dead on the couch where the children had sat, having died from internal bleeding, while the other 3 disappeared without a trace. The mysterious and disturbing phenomenon of black-eyed children, also known as black-eyed children or BECs, remained largely unknown until the mid-1990s. At that time, stories related to these strange entities began to spread across the internet, prompting more and more network users to come forward and share their experiences. But examples of people who received unwanted visits from BECs extend to before this period. One of the earliest documented examples of such an encounter dates back to 1950, when a 16-year-old boy living in rural Virginia returned to his parents in a state of panic, crying hysterically. Harold Whitaker Jr. explained to his father that he was on his way back from school when he noticed a boy about his age leaning against a nearby gate. This strange boy blocked his path and said, "I want to go to your house, you will take me to your house." Harold told his father that the young man's eyes were as black as tar, and that he suddenly felt absolute terror and anxiety. He also remembered having a clear impression that the other boy was somehow reading his thoughts. The black-eyed teenager moved to block his path and ordered the terrified Harold not to run away, insisting that he show him the way to his house. Harold recounted how he suddenly became confused and unable to think clearly. An uncomfortable suggestion began to form in his mind, urging him to comply, but he was suddenly seized with panic and fled. The last thing he heard was a howl like an animal echoing behind him. The story that introduced the concept of BECs to public awareness for the first time was published on the internet in 1996 by a man named Brian Bethel, a resident of Abilene, Texas. He wrote about his experience that year. According to Brian, he was sitting in his car on North 1st Street writing a check when he heard a sudden knock on the driver's window. When he looked up, he was surprised to see 2 boys standing next to the car, estimating their ages to be about 9 and 12 years old. When he lowered the window to talk to them, he was suddenly shocked by their penetrating black eyes that seemed to pierce his soul when they settled on him. The older of the two spoke in a monotonous and emotionless tone, telling Bethel that they had no money and needed a ride home. Completely disturbed by their demonic appearance, Bethel apologized and told the boys he couldn't help them. They seemed to be clearly angry about this and urged him to let them into his car. Suddenly Bethel noticed that his arm was now reaching for the door handle against his will. Terrified by their intense gaze, he instead raised the window, locked the car doors, and drove off into the night. As he sped away, Bethel looked in the rearview mirror to discover that the boys had completely evaporated, as if they had never existed. A more recent encounter occurred in Staffordshire, England in 2004. On the morning of September 13th, a couple was walking their dog through Cannock Chase Nature Reserve. They were walking along the main path near an area known as Stile Cop when they heard the sound of a small child's laughter coming from within the boundaries of the adjacent tree line. The couple stopped and looked into the dark undergrowth, searching for the source of the laughter, which suddenly stopped. After a moment, they turned to continue their walk but nearly jumped out of their skins when they saw a small girl now standing a short distance away, blocking their path. She was wearing an old-fashioned white dress, but it was her unblinking, motionless black eyes that captured their attention. The girl stood still, staring at them with a disturbing smile on her face. She did not respond or move at all when they tried to talk to her. She just stood there staring at them. Only when the couple's dog cautiously approached her did she turn and run back into the trees, laughing to herself. When describing the terrifying encounter to a local newspaper, the husband mentioned that throughout the incident, the girl seemed to have her head tilted to one side. The angle at which her head rested seemed uncomfortable and unnatural, as if it were suspended by a rope or cord of some kind. The husband and wife are just two of many witnesses who have encountered this ghost in Cannock Chase, and the repeated sightings of the black-eyed girl have led to a number of theories about the identity of this mysterious child. During the mid-1960s, the A34 road witnessed a series of brutal murders, which later became known as the Cannock Chase murders. In January 1966, the bodies of Margaret Reynolds, 6 years old, and Diana Tift, 5 years old, were found partially hidden in a ditch in Manstey Gully. The girls had been abducted from different areas in the West Midlands during their trips to and from school months earlier. The following year, another body was found less than a mile away, belonging to Christine Darby, who was 7 years old. The local police made exhaustive efforts to identify the killer, but no breakthrough in the case occurred until November 1968. Witnesses to an attempted abduction of a 10-year-old girl from a street in Warsaw provided the police with a car license plate number, leading to the arrest of a man named Raymond Leslie Morris. Morris was known to the authorities for his obsession with young girls, and was among the suspects questioned in the case of Christine Darby's disappearance. While in custody on charges of kidnapping, his wife confessed to officers that Morris had forced her to provide him with a false alibi for the day of Darby's disappearance. He was eventually convicted of her murder and died in prison in 2014, becoming one of the longest-serving inmates in England. Although he was not convicted of killing Reynolds and Tift, it was long believed that Morris was also responsible for their deaths. Reports of a ghostly girl haunting Cannock Chase began to appear shortly after his imprisonment. Local residents believe that the black-eyed girl is the ghost of one of these victims, her young spirit trapped and unable to depart. The idea that these haunting individuals might be the spirits of deceased children seems plausible, and some of the persuasive and repetitive behaviors of these alleged ghosts resemble those associated with phantom travelers. However, the majority of cases involving black-eyed children are either too isolated or strange in nature to be easily linked to a local ghost story. Some believe that instead of being confused or misguided spirits, these individuals are actually possessed by a more malevolent and destructive entity. In ancient Celtic beliefs in the United Kingdom, it was thought that black-eyed children were demons from another world roaming our realm in search of blood rituals and sacrifices. Across the ocean, in many Native American cultures, people with black eyes were viewed as similar to the Wendigo, considered unfortunate victims of an evil entity with hostile intentions. The Iroquois referred to this spirit as the Otcon, a malicious being whose goal was to infect key members of the tribe and gradually turn them against each other, starting with the most vulnerable prey, children. In 2017, residents of the Oglala Native American Reservation in Pine Ridge, South Dakota asked a shaman to visit their camp and bless it after reporting a series of encounters with Becks. For weeks, strange children with frightening black eyes approached the boundaries of their camp, trying to lure Sioux children to play with them. As expected, the camp children refused, finding the strangers' eyes soulless and terrifying. The strangers then focused on the adults in the reservation, demanding food and shelter in monotonous and emotionless voices. When their request was refused, one of the children asked the terrified residents if they had any blood to donate before disappearing again among the trees. In the following weeks, a number of pets disappeared from the community, until it seemed that the shaman's blessing had completely ended the matter. In many accounts describing Becks, such as those that occurred in Vermont, witnesses described seeing the children meeting with what were believed to be men in black suits. Sometimes these mysterious and frightening individuals are seen transporting the children in their cars. In other cases, the men in black suits either removed the black-eyed children, or visited their victims after the encounter. This naturally led to the emergence of a theory, suggesting that the children might be of extraterrestrial origin, or human children who had been abducted and assimilated in some way. The fact that they seem to possess a degree of psychological influence, and the ability to harm those they encounter, suggests that some commentators believe they are either involved in, or escapees from a sinister government experiment program. Given the absence of overt aggression during most encounters, and the fact that the phenomenon is relatively recent in nature, there is also a possibility that this is nothing more than an urban legend or an internet horror story. It is certain that a certain percentage of the testimonies published on the internet are merely creative writing on the part of their authors. On the other hand, it has become relatively easy nowadays to buy contact lenses that cover the entire visible part of the eye. Many horror films have used these lenses to achieve a frightening effect. There are also many types of medications where significant pupil dilation is one of the common side effects. It is entirely possible that environmental conditions such as street lighting could give the impression that someone's eyes are completely black during a brief encounter. What is perhaps surprising about the phenomenon of black-eyed children is the near-total absence of photographic or visual evidence. Their legend arose in the age of smartphones and advanced surveillance cameras, yet alleged witnesses have not been able to capture even a single convincing shot. One of our subscribers recently contacted us about an encounter that happened to him while working security at an abandoned building. One night, two young men approached the security fence surrounding the site and asked if they could take shelter in the abandoned building. At first they kept their gaze lowered, but when he refused their request for safety reasons and began to ask them about the whereabouts of their parents, they looked at him directly, revealing coal-black eyes. The surveillance camera footage provided by the subscriber clearly shows him talking to someone on the other side of the fence. He even visibly shudders at the point where he says they looked at him, yet the surveillance cameras strangely failed to record their presence, making it appear as if he was talking to thin air. Although interesting, the video itself provides no tangible evidence. A common feature of stories and accounts involving supernatural phenomena is the indication that the eyes of the creatures and entities involved differ in some way from those of ordinary humans. The vast majority of ghosts, aliens, and monsters described throughout the ages possess eyes devoid of pupil or iris, and consist of only one color. These eyes are usually red or black, colors traditionally associated with evil and malevolence. This means that stories involving black-eyed children can overlap with different types of narratives, such as ghost stories or alien abduction accounts. It is entirely possible that instead of being a separate phenomenon, the concept of Becks is simply a common stereotype in horror literature that commentators choose to view in isolation from its broader context.